Hello all. In the previous video, we had studied about sampling distribution, and in today's video, we'll study about standard error. Before studying about standard error, let us look at two important terms, that is variance and standard deviation. Variance is a measure of how data points vary from the mean. Basically, it shows us the dispersion of data points about the mean. It is denoted as sigma square. And standard deviation is nothing but square root of variance. It is denoted by the symbol sigma. Mostly the term standard deviation is largely used. Now let us see the formula for variance and standard deviation. Variance of a population is given by sigma square is equal to 1 upon population size summation of I equals to 1 to n data point minus population mean the whole square. Variance in case of a sample is given by S square is equal to 1 upon sample size minus 1 summation of I equals to 1 to small n data point minus sample mean the whole square. There is a small difference in the formula for population and sample. In case of population, we are dividing by population size, but in case of sample, we are dividing by sample size minus 1. Let us see why we do it. In unbiased estimate video, we had seen that we use a statistic to calculate the parameter. So if we divide by the sample size, we get a biased estimate, and if we divide by sample size minus 1, we get an unbiased estimate. This is because when we divide by sample size minus 1, we get a better value than when we divide by sample size. This is the reason why we divide by sample size minus 1 or n minus 1 in case of sample. One of the favorite questions of the examiners during Viva. And standard deviation is basically the square root of variance. Now let us understand what do we mean by standard deviation. Consider two populations, population 1 and population 2. Both have a population size of 6. Let us now calculate the mean for both the populations. We can see that we get the same value of mean, that is 5 feet for both the population. But you can see that the height of people in population 1 is less spread out than in case of population 2. So let's calculate the variance using the formula that we saw before. Variance is summation of I equals to 1 to n data point minus population mean the whole square divided by the population size. So we get a variance of 0.67 feet square for population 1 and 1.67 feet square for population 2. But as you can see that the mean is in feet, whereas the variance is in feet square. So it is not so intuitive. Hence we will use standard deviation, which is square root of the variance. Thus we get a standard deviation of 0.81 feet for population 1 and 1.29 feet for population 2. This clearly shows us that the data points in population 1 are less spread out from the mean than in case of population 2. This is the importance of standard deviation. Now let us see what is standard error. The standard deviation of the sampling distribution of a statistic is known as its standard error. We have just studied what is standard deviation, and in the previous video we had seen about sampling distribution. We had seen that the sampling distribution of sample mean and found that the mean of sampling distribution is equal to the population mean. So now if we take the standard deviation of sampling distribution of sample mean, we get sigma x bar is equal to the standard deviation of population divided by the square root of the sample size. This is called as the standard error of mean. The standard deviation of the sampling distribution of mean will give us the standard error of mean. Similarly, if we take the standard deviation of the sampling distribution of sample standard deviation, we will get standard error of standard deviation. Thus, we can get standard error of other statistics also. We can also see that we can reduce the value of standard error by increasing the sample size. But we must remember that increasing the sample size will result in increase in time, effort and cost. So now let us again see the difference between standard deviation and standard error. Standard deviation tells us how the data is distributed around the mean, whereas standard error is the standard deviation of the distribution formed by the sample mean. Coming to the utility of standard error forms the basis of testing of hypothesis, that is whether to accept or reject the null hypothesis. This we will see in the upcoming videos. That's all for today. In the next lecture, we'll study about statistical inference. Thank you.